The first time I met Sharon Vandel, she was standing in my driveway, arms crossed like she was about to issue a parking ticket on my own land. "You can't have that RV parked there," she said, nose wrinkled like she'd sniffed spoiled milk. "It violates our HOA aesthetic guidelines." I leaned against the fender, chewing a toothpick. "Sharon, I'm not even in your HOA," she blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Excuse me?" I pointed down the gravel road that ran behind my barn. "That little stretch your HOA uses to get to your gated kingdom. It cuts through my land. I just inherited all 200 acres of it from my uncle, Walter, and I've got the survey and deed to prove it." Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. Sharon was the president of the Larkspur Ridge HOA, a neighborhood packed with vinyl-sided mansions and matching mailboxes. The type of place where every lawn was mowed at the same angle and people got fined for having the wrong color mulch. The access road the HOA used to get in and out of Larkspur Ridge. It was a dusty lane that ran right through the south end of my inherited property. Uncle Walter never cared. He let them use it for free. But Walter also didn't have Sharon marching up his driveway threatening to fine him for visual pollution. I didn't plan to be a jerk, but Sharon made it real easy. 3 days later, I got a letter from the HOA. Certified mail. It claimed I had exactly 7 days to cease and desist obstructing HOA access or face legal action. Attached were grainy photos of my RV, a chicken coop that wasn't even mine, and a highlighted portion of the HOA bylaws. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. I responded with a simple letter. 1 sentence. "Your access road sits on my land. You have no legal easement. We can negotiate one." That's when the real games began. Sharon called a special emergency board meeting and invited me to attend. I showed up in jeans and a flannel shirt still dusted with sawdust from my workshop. Sharon wore a pantsuit like she was hosting a Senate hearing. "This is a serious matter," she said, tapping her acrylic nails on a stack of printed bylaws. "The HOA has used that road for over 20 years. That gives us prescriptive easement rights." "Not if Walter gave you permission," I said, flipping open a manila folder. "Which he did in writing, found it in his files, dated, signed, and notarized." Gasps from the board. Sharon's face flushed. "Then we'll fight this in court," she snapped. "Sure," I said. "But while you're in court, I'll be putting up a gate, and until that's settled, no one's getting to Larkspur Ridge without a long hike through the woods." Chaos. Someone knocked over a pitcher of water. Another board member whispered something about calling a lawyer. I stood and stretched. "Or you could pay me a fair monthly fee for easement rights. $2,000 a month. That gets you guaranteed access 24/7. Otherwise, consider the road closed by Friday." Sharon's jaw clenched so hard I thought I heard teeth crack. I walked out. By Thursday, they paid the first month. By the time the second payment was due, Sharon sent a different board member instead, a man in his 60s with a polite handshake and a folder tucked under his arm. "Name's Alan," he said, stepping carefully around a puddle near my workshop. "Vice president of the board. Thought we could talk through some alternatives." I led him up to the porch and poured 2 glasses of sweet tea. He glanced at the mason jar suspiciously before taking a sip. "We've been looking at the budget," he began, "and $2,000 a month is, well, it's not sustainable long term. The residents are starting to ask questions. Some of them are even wondering why we don't just build a new road." I raised an eyebrow. "You're welcome to try. But unless you've got a bridge team and a few million in spare change, you'll find the creek and those granite ridges don't cooperate." Alan let out a low whistle. "Didn't realize it was that bad. It's worse. The only other way out runs through wetland. Corps of Engineers would laugh you out of the building." He took another sip, slower this time. "Sharon's not going to like this," he said. "She doesn't have to," I replied, "but she might want to stop pushing her luck." I didn't mention what I'd found in the county records the day before. Figured I'd wait for the right moment. The next week I noticed something strange: survey flags. Bright orange planted along the edge of the access road like breadcrumbs. I followed them with a frown. They veered off the gravel and into a thicket near the creek, then deeper into my woods. The next morning, a pair of workers in hard hats showed up with clipboards and a ground scanner. "Can I help you?" I asked. One of them looked up. "We've been contracted by Larkspur Ridge HOA, here to assess the feasibility of an alternate route." "On whose land?" He checked his clipboard. "This parcel." I held out my hand. "Permit?" He hesitated. "We were told by the board that this land was under HOA jurisdiction." "Wrong answer," I said, pulling out my phone. "You've got 10 seconds to leave before I call the sheriff." They packed up fast. That afternoon, I drove to the county recorder's office and requested all recent filings from Larkspur Ridge HOA. Tucked between a fence variance and a landscaping complaint was a suspicious document, a forged easement agreement, backdated 3 years, with my uncle's name on it. Only problem: it wasn't his signature. I recognized Walter's handwriting. He'd shown me once how the loop in his W always dipped twice. The one on this document was a single, shallow curve. I made copies and drove straight to the sheriff's department. Detective Graves listened without interrupting, flipping through the paperwork slowly. His office smelled faintly of coffee and gun oil. "You're saying they forged a legal document to claim a permanent easement over your land?" "That's exactly what I'm saying." He leaned back, tapping the folder with his pen. "This isn't just a zoning issue. It's criminal fraud." The next day, a pair of deputies served a subpoena at the Larkspur Ridge HOA clubhouse. Sharon tried to intercept them at the door, but it was too late. Graves was already walking in behind them. I watched from across the street, arms folded. 2 residents stood beside me on the sidewalk. One of them, a woman in a faded yoga top, frowned toward the commotion. "They told us this was just a formality," she said. "Some minor paperwork thing." "Not quite," I said. "Looks like they tried to steal land." She turned to me, eyes narrowing. "You're the new guy, right? Walter's nephew?" I nodded. "I didn't vote for Sharon," she muttered, then walked away. By the end of the week, Graves called to update me. The forged easement had been filed by the HOA's legal counsel, one William Klein, a lawyer with a record of aggressive tactics. Apparently, he'd been sanctioned twice in the past for similar behavior in other developments. Klein was charged with felony fraud and obstruction. Sharon wasn't far behind. Texts between her and Klein revealed that she'd instructed him to handle it quietly. When asked by detectives what that meant, she refused to answer. The local paper ran a story on page 1, "HOA president under investigation for land fraud." When I stopped by the feed store that Friday, the clerk behind the counter gave me a thumbs up. "Heard you're giving those Larkspur folks a real education." "They're learning," I said, tossing a bag of seed onto the counter. Back at home, I installed a new set of trail cams, motion activated, infrared, and sending live footage to my phone. Not because I expected trouble, but because I didn't trust Sharon to go down quietly. Sure enough, that night around 11, my phone buzzed 2 figures. Flashlights. Walking along the edge of the woods near the access road, I called Graves. By the time the deputies arrived, the pair had retreated, but not before one of them tripped a wire I'd strung between 2 stakes. The resulting flare lit up the hillside like a 4th of July finale. Graves reviewed the footage the next morning. "One of them's definitely Klein," he said. "Already on bail and violating a no-contact order with the property in question. He's going back in." Sharon resigned 2 days later. The HOA scrambled to stabilize. Alan stepped in as interim president and scheduled an open forum, a real one, not one of those public comment limited to 30 seconds and no recording devices types. He called me the day before. "I know you don't owe us anything," he said. "But if you came and told your side, it might help clear the air." I agreed only because Alan had been straight with me. The room was packed. Folding chairs, people standing along the walls, even a couple teenagers sitting on the floor. I stepped to the front and cleared my throat. "I'm not here to make enemies," I said, "but I'm also not going to be walked on. My uncle let you use that road for free and you repaid him by trying to forge documents and steal the land. That's not how neighbors behave." A man in the back raised his hand. "We had no idea," he said. "Sharon told us you were trying to extort the HOA. I pulled out a copy of the forged easement and held it up. She filed this. It's a felony. And your HOA dues paid the lawyer who did it." Murmurs. One woman looked like she was going to be sick. Alan stepped up beside me. "We're opening an audit. Every expense from the last 5 years. And we'll be holding new board elections next month." After the meeting, a few residents came up to shake my hand. One offered to drop off a pie. Another asked if I'd consider helping draft a new charter. I told them I'd think about it. On the way home, I passed the orange survey flags still sticking out of the brush. I pulled them all up, one by one, and tossed them into the back of my truck. Let the HOA make their own trail from here on out. 2 weeks after Sharon stepped down, a beat-up sedan with no plates rolled up to the edge of the access road just past dusk. I was on my porch, oiling the chainsaw chain when I heard the tires crunch. The headlights stayed off. I watched for a minute. No one got out. Then the driver's side door popped open, and a man in a windbreaker stepped out, holding a long metal pipe. He walked over to the gate I'd installed sturdy steel, locked with a bolt-cut-resistant padlock, and started banging on the hinges like he was testing for weak points. I clicked on the floodlight. "Evening," I called out. He froze. I stepped off the porch with my phone already recording. "You lost," he didn't answer. Just bolted back to the car and peeled out, tires spraying gravel in a wide arc. I caught the last 3 digits on a sticker still stuck to the windshield. County auction tag. I sent the footage to Detective Graves. He called back the next morning. "That car was reported stolen out of Jefferson County 5 days ago," he said. "We're running the plates." "But I've got a hunch this isn't random." "Someone sent him," I said. He paused. "You got enemies?" "Just one. And she's running out of options." The new HOA board had been scrambling to untangle the mess Sharon left behind, but the deeper they dug, the uglier it got. Turns out the road situation was just the tip of the iceberg. I was sitting at the diner 3 towns over, halfway through a plate of biscuits and ham when Alan slid into the booth across from me. "She had 2 sets of books," he said quietly. "One for the residents, one for herself. We found expenses for landscaping that never happened. Invoices paid to a company that doesn't exist, even a reimbursement for a retreat in Scottsdale." He shook his head. "None of the other board members knew." I set my fork down. "You call the state attorney?" "Already did. They're launching a formal audit. HOA's under investigation for embezzlement now." We were quiet for a while, then Alan looked up. "I need a favor, not a big one." I raised an eyebrow. "Would you be willing to let us post an emergency access sign on the easement? Just a temporary one." Ambulance got delayed last week because the GPS doesn't show the road anymore ever since you gated it, and the route got flagged as restricted. I considered it. Only if you install the sign on your side of the gate. And it needs to say private use emergency vehicles only, nothing about public access. That's fair. The next morning, a pair of volunteers from the HOA came to install the sign. One of them, a retired firefighter named Joe, brought a thermos of coffee and a box of bear claws. "I didn't vote for Sharon either," he said, handing me the box. "And I'm glad someone finally stood up to her." By the end of the week, more residents started dropping by with questions. Not complaints, genuine questions. How to get a parcel rezoned. What the county's setback laws were. Whether I'd consider leasing a corner of my land for community gardens. I told them I'd think about it. I wasn't interested in becoming a local hero, I just didn't like bullies. It was Graves who called again 3 days later. "We got a break," he said. "The guy in the sedan, we picked him up. Turns out he was hired for $500 cash to take care of a lock. Didn't know who Sharon was, just met a guy in a parking lot who handed him the tools and a burner phone. Did you get the number?" We did. And it pinged near the old Larkspur Ridge clubhouse the same night. Guess who's still been using the place after hours without permission? I didn't answer. We've got enough to charge her with attempted trespass and conspiracy to commit property damage. It won't put her away for long, but it's added to her fraud charges. State's folding it all into one case. That night, I walked the perimeter of the gate again, reinforced the posts with concrete, then added a motion sensor to the top rail. If anyone touched it again, I'd know before they even got close. A week later, Alan invited me to attend the residents' financial audit meeting. I sat in the back this time, arms crossed, watching as a forensic accountant laid out diagrams on a projector. Flow charts, bank statements, wire transfers to shell companies. One of the residents, a man in a flannel vest, stood up halfway through. "All those fines she wrote us," he said, voice shaking. "For things like non-regulation shutters and improper garage lighting, where did that money go?" The accountant didn't flinch. "Most of it into a personal account registered under Sharon Vandel's name," gasps around the room. Someone dropped a pen. Another woman covered her mouth with both hands. Alan stepped forward. "We're filing a civil suit as a group. We'll pursue restitution. Anybody who was fined unfairly can submit a claim. We're going to make this right." After the meeting, Alan caught me outside. "We're going to remove the old board entirely. Start from scratch. I know you're not in the HOA, but would you consider being an advisor just for a while? Help us write a new charter that doesn't leave room for this kind of abuse." "I'll think about it," I said. Truth was, I'd already started researching easement law more seriously. Not just for me, for others like me. Rural landowners who got steamrolled by overreaching HOAs because they didn't know their rights. The next morning, I got a call from an editor at the county paper. "We're doing a feature on land inheritance and property rights," she said. "Your story's making the rounds. People are starting to pay attention." "I'm not looking for attention," I said. "Maybe not, but you're setting a precedent." I didn't respond, just hung up and went back to tightening a fence post near the creek. The air was cool, damp with dew, and the frogs were starting to stir in the reeds. A few days later, Graves called again. "Sharon finally cracked," he said. "Tried to flee the county, blew through a toll booth, got stopped 2 hours outside state lines, claimed she was going to visit family. With $17,000 in cash and no luggage. They holding her. Judge denied bail. She's being arraigned next week. DA's pushing for trial within the month." I didn't go to the arraignment. I didn't need to. I already knew how it would end. Instead, I met Alan and Joe near the edge of the access road, where the gravel met the asphalt. They were installing a new signpost, clean white with reflective lettering. Larkspur Ridge private access maintained with easement agreement. I nodded. "That'll do." Joe stepped back and wiped his hands on his jeans. "You know, this place was starting to feel like a prison. Now it feels like a neighborhood again." Alan glanced toward the tree line. "We're having a community potluck next month. You should come." I didn't answer right away. Just looked out at the land, my land stretching wide and green under the late morning sun. "I'll bring the cornbread," I said. We shook hands. Not a contract. Not a deal. Just neighbors, finally on level ground. The county courthouse was packed tighter than a rodeo on discount beer night. There were folding chairs lined against the back wall, reporters hunched over notepads, and at least 3 residents from Larkspur Ridge whispering behind me like they were at a funeral. The judge, an older woman with a voice that cut through the room like a wood planer, called the proceedings to order. Sharon was led in wearing a navy business suit that looked like it had been slept in, her wrists cuffed in front of her. She didn't look at anyone except the floor. District Attorney Mitchell laid it out with no fluff. Charges of wire fraud, document forgery, conspiracy to commit trespass, and misappropriation of funds. Then he added the curveball, a sealed affidavit from a whistleblower, one of the former board members who'd flipped to avoid charges. He'd handed over emails showing Sharon had been skimming money for nearly 8 years. And worse, she'd used a portion of the funds to pay private investigators to dig into residents' personal finances. The room went dead quiet. You could have heard someone uncapping a pen. Judge Renner leaned forward. Is the defendant prepared to enter a plea? Sharon's attorney, a stiff-necked man with thinning hair and sweat building on his collar, whispered something in her ear. She didn't speak at first. Then she raised her head, eyes bleary. Guilty? It hit the crowd like a dropped anvil. The sentencing was scheduled for a month later. Maximum penalty for the stack of felonies was 20 years. The DA was pushing for 12 minimum. Sharon was taken back into custody, no bail, no statements, no eye contact. After the hearing, I stepped outside into the sharp spring air. Alan was already there, pacing near the flagpole. You hear the part about the investigators, he said, rubbing his temple with 2 fingers. She pulled credit reports on over 20 residents. Even tried to get into a widow's bank records. How'd she get away with that for so long? She had a guy at a private firm, fake invoices. She buried them under line items like property evaluation services and community security consultation. You going to notify the victims? Already working on it. The new treasurer's compiling a list. Will offer legal assistance if they need it. Good, I said. They deserve a shot at cleaning up whatever mess she made. He nodded slowly but didn't say anything else. Back at the property, I got back to work. Spring rains had washed out part of the drainage ditch near the south fence line, and I had a delivery of gravel coming in that afternoon. I was halfway through shoveling out the mud when a pickup pulled up short behind me. The driver waved. It was the county supervisor, Marta Delaney, tall, no-nonsense, clipboard always in hand. Mind if I take a walk with you? She asked. I set the shovel down on the tailgate. Didn't think I was on your calendar. Not officially, she said, but Sheriff Graves briefed the county board. We've got concerns. About future access, emergency services, liability, the HOA's in shambles and your gate's the only way in or out. If something happens to you, or if you decide you've had enough and yank the easement, we've got 300 people boxed in. I'm not planning on doing anything drastic. Still, the board's considering a motion to formalize the easement as a permanent public utility access. That would make it a designated emergency corridor. You'd retain property rights, but the easement would be locked in through the county. I crossed my arms. And that means I lose the right to negotiate changes, raise the fee, or revoke it if they try anything again. You'd get a one-time compensation, a buyout. How much? Depends on the evaluation, but likely in the range of $30,000 to $40,000. I shook my head. Not interested. What I've got is leverage, and after what they tried to pull, I'm not giving that up for the price of a decent tractor. Marta didn't argue, she just made a note on her clipboard. Then we'll table the motion. For now, appreciated. That night, I pulled out the folder I'd started keeping on Larkspur Ridge. I added a new tab, County Interference, and wrote down the date and details of Marta's visit. Wasn't paranoia, just preparation. The next week, I was invited to the first town hall meeting hosted by the new board. Not an HOA meeting. This one was open to the whole community, including non-members. They held it in the community park under string lights and a rented tent. Folding tables were loaded with crock pots, covered dishes, and desserts with names like Heavenly Haystack Bars and Granny's Banana Dream. I brought firewood and helped stack the burn barrels. When Alan stepped up to the mic, he didn't have notes. Just a list of goals written on the back of his hand. We're not going to pretend everything's fixed, he said, but we're going to be transparent, we're going to be accountable, and nobody's going to make decisions behind closed doors ever again. Applause, not loud but steady. He called me up next. I kept it short. I'm not one of you, I don't pay dues, I don't vote on your board, but I live next door and I've got a stake in what happens here. Not because I wanted one, but because someone tried to take what wasn't theirs. And when people let that kind of thing slide, it spreads. I let that hang for a second. I'm not your enemy, just don't make me your problem again. Afterward, a man in a faded veteran's ball cap approached. He introduced himself as Frank. Said he'd lived in the neighborhood since the lots were first cleared. She fined me $300 for putting my flagpole in the wrong spot, he said. I had the plans approved by the city. Still got the paperwork. You filing a claim? Damn right I am. In the weeks that followed, over 70 residents submitted reimbursement requests. The new board reviewed each one. Some were denied, but most were approved. They even hired an outside mediator to handle disputes. I stayed out of it, but I watched. Then, in early summer, Alan showed up again, this time with a formal proposal. "We want to build a backup exit route," he said. "Not to bypass your land, but to have an alternate in case of fire or flood. We'll pay for the survey, the construction, and the permits. We just need your go-ahead to run it along the northern edge of your property line. It'll avoid the creek and skirt the ridge." I took the plans, studied them, ran the numbers. "You're going to need to trim through 40 yards of heavy timber. That's not cheap. Already budgeted. We got a grant from the state emergency fund. And if I say no, we keep the current easement arrangement. Nothing changes," I nodded, "then go ahead. But I want the route documented as non-commercial, emergency use only. No future HOA board gets to turn it into a shortcut for construction trucks or delivery vans." Agreed. Construction began a month later. The northern route wasn't pretty, just a gravel lane with reinforced culverts and a single solar-powered gate. But it gave them peace of mind, and it gave me leverage. I had control of 2 access points now. By late summer, Larkspur Ridge held a vote to amend their bylaws. No more fines without third-party review, no more closed-door sessions. Any spending over $5,000 required a resident vote. And the biggest change: no board member could serve more than 2 consecutive terms. The charter passed by 84%. I was back in my workshop, sanding down a cedar bench when Alan stopped by one last time. "Just came to say thanks," he said. "Without you, none of this would have come to light. We'd still be paying into a system that was broken." "Glad it worked out," I said. He paused at the edge of the porch. "You ever think about running for office?" I laughed. "Not a chance. I like my porch too much." He grinned, waved, and drove off. I watched the dust settle behind his truck, then turned back toward the field. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the gravel access road, the same road that started this whole mess. It was quiet now. No more threats. No more forged documents. Just the steady rhythm of wind in the trees and the distant hum of cicadas. The kind of peace you earn. Not the kind you inherit, and I plan to keep